My husband faked his own death to steal our fortune, so I bought his new paradise and evicted him. My name is Nora. For over a decade I believed my life was a beautifully constructed masterpiece, a flawless blend of personal happiness and immense professional success. Before we continue, please subscribe and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps this powerful, life-changing story reach the world. I am an architect and my mind has always been wired to see the world in terms of structure, foundation, and integrity. I spent my 20s grinding through brutal apprenticeships and late-night drafting sessions, eventually founding my own luxury real estate development firm, Apex Designs. When I met Julian, I thought I had found the perfect partner to help me build my empire. He was charming, aggressively ambitious, and possessed a brilliant mind for international finance. While I designed breathtaking multi-million-dollar eco-villas and towering glass penthouses, Julian managed the business side. He handled the complex investment portfolios, the massive client deposits, and the offshore tax structuring. I trusted him implicitly. We were the golden couple of the city's high society real estate scene, featured in magazines and invited to the most exclusive galas. I believed our foundation was carved from solid bedrock. I had no idea that the man sleeping next to me was systematically hollowing out my entire life from the inside. The division of labor in our marriage and our business was incredibly clear. I was the creative force. I poured my soul into the blueprints, the site visits, and the meticulous construction of our projects. Julian was the financial gatekeeper. Because I was always so consumed by the grueling demands of structural engineering and client management, I gladly handed him the keys to the kingdom. He controlled the corporate accounts, the private marital savings, and the extensive life insurance policies we had taken out on each other to secure the business. I never asked to see the bank statements. If Julian said we had a record-breaking quarter, I celebrated with him. If he said we needed to shift capital into a Cayman Islands holding company for tax benefits, I signed the endless stacks of paperwork he placed on my desk without a second thought. I loved him, and I thought his relentless drive was dedicated to securing our shared future. I was too busy staring at the sky, designing skyscrapers, to notice that Julian was quietly digging a massive, dark tunnel right beneath my feet, preparing to take everything I had ever earned. The nightmare officially began in the middle of a sweltering July. Julian told me he needed to take a solo sailing trip to the Caribbean. He claimed he was scouting a highly exclusive, private island for a potential luxury resort development. It wasn't unusual for him to travel alone for business, and he had always been an avid, experienced sailor. I kissed him goodbye at the airport, told him I loved him, and promised to hold down the fort while he was gone. For the first 3 days, he called me every evening from his chartered yacht, laughing and describing the crystal-clear water and the warm tropical breezes. But on the 4th day, a massive unpredicted tropical storm suddenly formed off the coast of the Bahamas. I sat glued to the television screen in our penthouse, watching the terrifying weather reports with a growing knot of dread in my stomach. I tried calling his satellite phone a dozen times, but it went straight to a dead, staticky silence. I paced the floor all night, praying for his safety, desperately hoping he had simply lost a signal. The call came at 6 o'clock the following morning. It was a representative from the Bahamian Coast Guard. The voice on the other end of the line was grim, professional, and entirely devastating. They had found Julian's chartered yacht entirely capsized and shattered against a highly treacherous coral reef. The emergency life raft had not been deployed, and the severe, violent storm surge had battered the vessel into unrecognizable debris. Despite a massive, comprehensive search and rescue operation involving helicopters and dive teams, Julian was nowhere to be found. Given the catastrophic nature of the wreckage and the shark-infested waters, the Coast Guard officially presumed him lost at sea. I dropped the phone on the hardwood floor and collapsed to my knees, letting out a raw, agonizing scream that echoed through our empty, echoing penthouse. My husband was gone. The love of my life had been swallowed by the dark, unforgiving ocean. For the next several weeks I was a walking ghost, drowning in an ocean of profound, suffocating grief. The memorial service was a blur of black dresses, somber handshakes, and whispered condolences. Hundreds of people from the city's elite circles attended, weeping over the tragic, sudden loss of such a brilliant, charismatic man. I stood at the front of the grand church, staring at an empty, highly polished mahogany casket, unable to process the sheer magnitude of my loss. Julian's former personal assistant, Elena, a young, beautiful woman who had worked for us for 2 years, wept hysterically in the front row. I even hugged her, comforting her, believing she was simply mourning a wonderful boss. I was entirely consumed by the heavy, blinding fog of a widow's trauma. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I certainly couldn't think about architecture or real estate. I spent my days curled up in his favorite chair, wearing his old sweaters, desperately trying to hold on to the fading scent of his cologne. I thought the pain of losing him was the worst agony I would ever experience. I was incredibly, devastatingly wrong. 2 months after the memorial, the reality of my responsibilities finally forced me to emerge from my dark, grieving shell. The business still needed to run, our employees needed their paychecks, and the massive estate needed to be settled. I scheduled a meeting with our corporate attorneys and our primary bankers to formally begin the painful process of unfreezing the accounts and claiming the massive, $10 million life insurance policy that Julian had insisted we maintain. I sat in a sleek, glass-walled conference room, clutching a hot cup of coffee, feeling numb and exhausted. The lead banker, a usually warm, jovial man named Harrison, walked into the room looking pale and incredibly nervous. He avoided my gaze as he opened a thick, heavy manila folder. "Nora," Harrison began, his voice trembling slightly, "we have spent the last few weeks trying to consolidate the firm's assets and your personal accounts for the probate process. But there is a massive, inexplicable problem. We assume Julian had discussed this with you before his passing, but given your current financial status, I fear you may not know." "Know what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Harrison took a deep breath and turned a printed spreadsheet toward me. "The accounts are empty, Nora. All of them." I stared at the paper, my tired brain struggling to comprehend the numbers. The primary operating account for Apex Designs, which should have held over $8 million in client escrow and operating capital, showed a balance of less than $10,000. Our joint marital savings account, which held the profits from a decade of grueling work, was entirely drained. Where did it go? I asked, a cold, terrifying panic rising in my chest. Did the market crash? Did he make a bad investment? Harrison shook his head grimly. No, this wasn't an investment loss. This was a systematic, highly calculated withdrawal. Over the 6 weeks leading up to his sailing trip, Julian executed a series of complex, untraceable wire transfers. He moved nearly $15 million out of your domestic accounts and funneled the cash through a labyrinth of offshore shell companies. "It's gone, Nora. He took everything." The room spun violently. The air conditioning suddenly felt like freezing wind against my skin. I couldn't breathe. My husband hadn't just died. He had left me financially ruined, burdened with millions of dollars in unfulfilled client contracts and corporate debt. The grief that had paralyzed me for 2 months instantly vanished, replaced by a sudden, sharp and terrifying clarity. Julian was a brilliant financial mind. He didn't make mistakes, and he certainly wouldn't drain our life savings right before taking a dangerous, solo sailing trip unless he had a very specific reason. A dark, terrifying suspicion began to blossom in the back of my mind. A capsized boat, an empty life raft, a body that was conveniently never recovered. $15 million vanished into the wind. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, creating a picture so utterly horrifying that it made my blood run cold. Julian hadn't died in a tragic accident. Julian had murdered his own identity, stolen my entire life's work, and vanished into a tropical ghost story. I didn't go to the police. If I reported my suspicions to the authorities, it would trigger a massive, highly public federal investigation. The press would turn my tragedy into a scandalous media circus. My clients would immediately pull their remaining contracts, and my firm would be completely destroyed before I could even attempt to save it. Furthermore, the authorities moved slowly, bound by red tape and international jurisdictions. I needed someone who moved in the shadows. I reached out to a man named Elias, a ruthless, highly expensive private investigator and forensic accountant, who specialized in tracking stolen corporate assets for the ultra-wealthy. Elias was a ghost himself, a man who could hack into offshore banking registries and track financial footprints across continents. We met in a dimly lit, empty bar on the edge of the city. I slid a heavy envelope containing my last remaining personal funds across the table. My husband faked his death and stole $15 million, I told Elias, my voice like crushed ice. I don't want you to find him so I can arrest him. I want you to find the money. Elias went to work immediately. For 3 agonizing weeks, I maintained the public facade of a grieving, heartbroken widow. I went to the office, smiled sadly at my employees, and secretly fielded angry calls from creditors, begging for extensions. Behind the scenes, Elias was tearing apart Julian's digital life. He discovered that Julian had spent months meticulously covering his tracks, using encrypted servers and dummy corporations registered in countries with notoriously strict banking secrecy laws. But Julian had made one crucial, arrogant mistake. In his haste to launder the massive sum of stolen money, he had used a specific, obscure routing algorithm that Elias recognized. Elias traced the digital breadcrumbs from the Bahamas, through a Swiss privacy bank, and finally to a massive holding company registered in the Cayman Islands called Blue Horizon Holdings. The company had been formed just days before Julian's death. Late one night, Elias called me on an encrypted line. I found him, Nora, he said, his voice flat and professional. He didn't just steal the money. He bought himself a kingdom. Elias sent me a secure, encrypted file containing dozens of high-resolution photographs and digital documents. I opened the file on my laptop, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The photographs were taken by a local contact Elias had hired on the ground in a remote, ultra-exclusive coastal region of Costa Rica. The images showed a man sitting on the sun-drenched terrace of a massive, incredibly luxurious boutique eco-resort. The man was sporting a deep tan, a relaxed linen shirt, and designer sunglasses. He looked older, heavier, and completely at peace. It was Julian. He was alive, thriving, and drinking a cocktail while I was drowning in the debts he had strapped to my back. But the second photograph in the file was the one that truly broke my reality into a million jagged shards. Sitting next to Julian, laughing and clinking her champagne glass against his, was Elena, his former personal assistant. The same woman who had wailed and sobbed so theatrically at his memorial service. She was wearing a stunning, expensive diamond necklace and a designer swimsuit, lounging in the Costa Rican sun like royalty. They had planned this together. They had carried out a massive, highly coordinated heist, stealing the fortune I had bled to build, laughing at my grief while they escaped to a tropical paradise. Elias explained the rest of the file. Using Blue Horizon Holdings, Julian purchased a sprawling 20-acre luxury boutique resort, hidden in the Costa Rican jungle. He's operating it under a fake passport and a new alias, Alexander Vance. He poured all your stolen money into buying the property in cash, renovating it, and marketing it to ultra-wealthy tourists. He thinks he's completely untouchable. I stared at the glowing computer screen, looking at the face of the man I had loved, the man I had mourned, now living a billionaire's fantasy with his young mistress. A normal person might have felt sorrow. A normal person would have immediately dialed the FBI. But I was not normal anymore. The betrayal had burned away every soft, vulnerable part of my soul, leaving behind nothing but a cold, calculating, and ruthless architect. I didn't just want to send him to prison. Prison was too easy. Prison meant he would get 3 meals a day, and a bed while my company went into bankruptcy. I wanted to dismantle his new life piece by piece. I wanted to take the paradise he had bought with my blood and tear it out of his hands. I wanted him to feel the exact terrifying moment when the floor completely dropped out from beneath his feet. I looked at Elias's report and formulated a plan so vicious, so legally flawless, that Julian wouldn't even see the knife until it was already buried to the hilt. I scheduled an emergency meeting with the most aggressive, terrifyingly brilliant corporate litigator in the city, a woman named Victoria. I laid out Elias's entire dossier on her massive oak desk. I showed her the shell company, the fake passport, and the Costa Rican resort. I don't want a criminal trial yet, I told Victoria. If we freeze his assets through the criminal courts, the money gets tied up in international evidence lockers for a decade, and I lose my firm. I want a hostile legal corporate takeover. Victoria reviewed the documents, her sharp eyes scanning the complex offshore routing numbers. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. Julian was smart, Victoria noted. But he was sloppy. Because he used a fake identity to sign the purchasing deeds for the resort, Alexander Vance doesn't legally exist. However, the holding company that owns the resort, Blue Horizon Holdings, was originally funded directly by wire transfers from your joint marital accounts. Victoria explained the brilliant, devastating legal loophole we were going to exploit. Because the initial seed money used to create the Cayman Holding Company was definitively proven to be stolen marital assets, and because Julian was legally declared dead, Nora was technically the sole surviving heir and the rightful legal owner of the stolen funds. Julian had built a massive, impenetrable fortress, but he had built it on land that legally belonged to his widow. Working entirely in the shadows, Victoria filed highly expedited, sealed emergency injunctions in international financial courts. We presented the irrefutable forensic accounting proof that Blue Horizon Holdings was purchased with stolen marital funds. Because the registered owner of the holding company was a fraudulent ghost identity, there was no one to legally contest the filing. Within 2 agonizingly long, stressful weeks, the international judge ruled in our favor. A quiet administrative gavel struck a wooden block in a courtroom thousands of miles away, and the deed to the multi-million-dollar Costa Rican resort was quietly, legally, and permanently transferred entirely into my name. Julian had absolutely no idea. He was busy drinking expensive rum and managing his wealthy guests, completely oblivious to the fact that his massive, luxurious empire had just been legally purchased out from under him by the wife he had left for dead. With the deed securely locked in my briefcase, I booked a first-class ticket to Costa Rica. I didn't pack a swimsuit. I packed tailored, razor-sharp designer business suits, a pair of dark sunglasses, and a heart made of solid ice. Elias accompanied me, acting as my personal security and witness. When our private car pulled up to the massive, heavily guarded gates of the Vance Luxury Eco-Resort, my breath caught in my throat. It was breathtaking. Sprawling teakwood villas, infinity pools blending into the lush jungle canopy, and private white sand beaches. I had worked 80-hour weeks for a decade to earn the money that bought this place. It was beautiful and it was entirely mine. I walked up to the grand open-air reception desk, removing my sunglasses. The young, cheerful concierge smiled warmly at me. "Welcome to the Vance Resort, madam. How can I help you?" I placed my premium black credit card on the marble counter. "I need your best presidential villa," I said smoothly. "Booked under my maiden name, Nora Sterling." The concierge quickly processed the transaction, completely unaware that she was handing a room key to the actual owner of the building. Elias and I settled into the massive, opulent villa. I spent the first 2 days observing the resort like a ghost. I watched Julian from a distance. He looked incredibly arrogant, strutting around the property in expensive linen suits, loudly barking orders at the staff, and playing the role of the self-made, visionary hotelier. Elena was always by his side, dripping in expensive jewelry, treating the hard-working local staff with shocking, entitled cruelty. They were living a grotesque, stolen fairy tale. It was time to introduce the villain. On the morning of my 3rd day, I executed the final phase of my plan. I had Victoria, my lawyer back in the States, formally contact the resort's local management and human resources department. She sent them the authenticated, legally binding international deeds proving that the entire resort, the land, and the holding company had undergone an immediate, total change of ownership. The email included a strict, non-negotiable directive. The new owner was currently on the property and required a mandatory, all-staff assembly in the grand lobby at exactly high noon. No exceptions. Julian, acting as the general manager under his fake alias, was of course notified of this meeting by his confused staff. I could only imagine his absolute total panic. He probably thought a rival cartel or a massive corporate conglomerate was initiating a hostile takeover. He had no idea the truth was infinitely more terrifying. At exactly 11:55 a.m., the grand, expansive lobby was packed with nearly 100 confused hotel employees, maids, chefs, concierges, and groundskeepers. At precisely noon, Julian marched down the grand, sweeping staircase, looking furious, confused, and deeply agitated. Elena trailed behind him, looking equally panicked. Julian grabbed a microphone from the podium set up in the center of the lobby, preparing to aggressively defend his stolen territory. "I don't know what kind of administrative mistake has occurred," Julian boomed into the microphone, trying to project total authority. "But I assure you I am Alexander Vance, and I am the sole owner of this property. Everyone returned to your posts immediately. The crowd of employees murmured anxiously, unsure of what to do. The heavy mahogany doors of the private VIP lounge slowly opened. The chaotic murmuring instantly died down as I stepped out into the bright, tropical sunlight of the main lobby. I was wearing a sharp, tailored white suit, my hair pulled back perfectly, looking every inch the ruthless corporate architect he had originally married. I walked slowly, deliberately, the sharp click of my high heels echoing loudly across the marble floor. I stopped exactly 10 feet away from the podium. I didn't say a word. I just took off my sunglasses and stared directly into the eyes of my dead husband. The microphone slipped out of Julian's hand, hitting the marble floor with a deafening high-pitched screech of feedback. His deeply tanned face turned the color of wet, gray ash. His knees visibly buckled, and he had to grab the edge of the wooden podium just to remain standing. He looked as if he had just seen a demon rise directly from the depths of hell. Elena, standing behind him, let out a loud, highly dramatic gasp of pure horror, instinctively backing away from him as if he were suddenly radioactive. "Hello, Julian," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the massive, dead-silent room. The sound of his real name caused a ripple of immense confusion among the local staff. "Or do you prefer Alexander now?" I must admit, the fake tan suits a dead man quite well. Julian couldn't speak. He opened and closed his mouth like a suffocating fish, his mind completely short-circuiting as it tried to process the absolute impossibility of my presence. "And Nora?" he finally choked out, his voice a pathetic, broken wheeze. How are you here?" I walked up the short steps to the podium, pulling the thick stack of heavily certified, legally binding deeds from my leather briefcase. I slammed the heavy documents down onto the wood, right in front of his shaking hands. "I'm here to inspect my new property," I stated coldly, loud enough for the entire staff to hear. "I bought it. Or, rather, I legally reclaimed it since you used my $15 million to purchase it through a highly fraudulent shell company." Julian frantically grabbed the legal documents, his eyes darting wildly across the heavily stamped pages. He saw the international court seals, the asset transfers, and my name listed as the sole, absolute majority shareholder and owner of Blue Horizon Holdings. The brilliant, arrogant mastermind finally realized he had been completely outplayed. You stole my resort," he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of raw terror and fury. "I built this. This is mine." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that held absolutely no humor. "You built a sandcastle with my money, Julian. And the tide just came in." I turned to the massive crowd of highly confused hotel employees. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced clearly, "my name is Nora. I am the legal owner of this resort. The man standing before you is an international fraudster who has been illegally operating this facility under a fake identity. Effective immediately, his employment as general manager is permanently terminated. Security, please escort this man off my private property." Julian panicked. His carefully constructed, luxurious facade violently shattered into a million pieces. "You can't do this," he screamed desperately, losing all semblance of his charming persona. "I'll call the local police. I'll have you arrested for trespassing." I stepped closer to him, lowering my voice so only he and Elena could hear the deadly venom in my tone. "Call them, Julian," I whispered coldly. "Please pick up the phone. I would absolutely love to explain to the Costa Rican authorities, the FBI, and the international banking regulators exactly how a legally dead man committed massive life insurance fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. You call the police, and you spend the next 25 years in a federal penitentiary." Julian froze. The terrifying, inescapable reality of his situation crashed down on him with the weight of a collapsing skyscraper. If he fought me, he went to prison. If he walked away, he lost everything. He was entirely, utterly trapped in a cage of his own making. Elena, finally realizing the catastrophic magnitude of the situation, immediately saw the writing on the wall. She wasn't in love with Julian. She was in love with the stolen millions. "You lied to me," she shrieked theatrically, turning on Julian with vicious speed. "You told me the money was clean. I want nothing to do with this." She didn't even look back as she sprinted toward her villa to pack her expensive designer bags. She was abandoning the sinking ship, leaving Julian completely isolated, broke, and exposed. Two large, imposing resort security guards, men whose salaries I now paid, stepped up to the podium, grabbing Julian roughly by the arms. He didn't fight back. He looked completely hollowed out, utterly defeated by the woman he thought he had successfully buried. As they dragged him out the front doors of the grand lobby, tossing him onto the dusty road outside the massive gates with absolutely nothing but the linen shirt on his back, I didn't feel a single ounce of pity. He had gambled my life and he had lost his own. I spent the next month in Costa Rica, completely overhauling the resort. I fired the corrupt management team Julian had hired and promoted the hardworking local staff. I officially rebranded the property as the Apex Retreat, turning it into one of the most highly profitable, exclusive destinations in the entire hemisphere. The massive profits from the resort not only replenished the $15 million Julian had stolen, but they also entirely funded the global expansion of my architectural firm. As for Julian, I eventually made an anonymous, highly detailed tip to the international authorities, providing them with his fake passport details and his exact location. He was arrested sleeping on a beach a few weeks later, extradited back to the States, and sentenced to 15 years for insurance fraud and grand larceny. I returned to my penthouse in the city, standing on the balcony, looking out over the skyline I had helped build. I was no longer just an architect, I was a conqueror. My husband faked his death to steal my fortune, but he only succeeded in resurrecting a version of me that was utterly unbreakable.